folks, and welcome back to this week's The Rebel's Edge. I'm John Najarian. The other gentleman is my brother, and he's no gentleman. Pete
He's no gentleman.
No gentleman. Fresh from the Kenny Chesney concert at Arrowhead Stadium.
Awesome.
60 some odd thousand people seeing Kenny and rocking out to that this weekend. That had to be pretty fun, Pete.
That was awesome. A bunch of the Chiefs were there. It was phenomenal. We had Old Dominion, John's kicking it off, and then Dan and Shay. And I'll tell you what, Kenny runs that stage. He sweats like a dog out there, and we absolutely loved it. He was on for a full 2 hours or more. The guy's got enough songs to do 6 hours, but he only did 2. And so we didn't get to hear every single song, but it was phenomenal.
And he lives not too far from me, Pete. Right now I'm in Chicago, but he lives, I think, in St. John, U.S. Virgin Islands.
Yeah, he's the Jimmy Buffett of the modern era. There's no doubt. The guy's always on a boat. The guy's always out there having cocktails, having a great time, but he stays in unbelievable shape. And, you know, he was telling somebody that was a friend of mine who was backstage, he was talking about how he stays in such great shape and what he does. And there's a reason he's got the trucks that he's got, John, because they've got a lot of workout equipment in there, a lot like Tiger Woods used to do when he'd fly around, you know, with wherever he'd go. They had all his workout stuff there, which is why Tiger always looks so jacked.
Yeah. We'll have to tell a Tiger story another time because I got a couple good ones. But Pete, let's kick it off this week with Google because they're coming up on a 20-for-1 split. And a lot of people, you know, they rip into companies when they're doing a 20-for-1 split because they say, hey, nothing really changed. But you and I, Pete, know one really big thing changed, and that is option players can actually use their shares because at 20-to-1, if it's $2,000, having that come down $20 or 20 times means it's much more accessible. People can have 1,000 share position, but it's really tough when it's $2,000 a share.
Yeah, it's about liquidity, John. It's about the use of options. There's so many different things that come into play. And there's got to be a reason why when you go 1 year out after somebody has done a split, that the stock is generally higher than the S&P by, I think it's double digits. So there's a lot of reasons why. We all understand exactly what happened. And fundamentally, should it be changes? Probably not, but it is. And it's more volatile. There's a lot of different things that happen when you do one of these kind of splits. By the way, it wasn't that long ago, April 2014, that they split as well, John. So it's this is not going to be foreign for Google, but the 20-for-1, that's a biggie. I mean, it's a lot like what we just went through with Amazon, and we might be talking about Amazon later on too, huh?
We might be, Pete. Yeah, that's I would say that this one is a buy, even though it did get a downgrade today. I think it is a buy on any dips here because everything from autonomous vehicles, which they work on, to all the others, I would say this one's a buy, Pete.
Yep, I don't disagree with you, John. I think it's phenomenal. I think it was getting too cheap. I got the next one. We're going to jump to oil. We talk about crude all the time. Not too long ago, beginning of June, this was $123, John. It's amazing how it's pulled back, you know, and sometimes, and I consider a lot of these pauses and a little bit of, you know, kind of coming back down because not everything goes straight up. We all know that. All you got to do is go back and look at the price of crude oil. And I have to correct some of my CNBC folks out there that say, well, it all started with Ukraine. Well, if that's what you really believe, then I don't know how on God's green earth you can sit there and go back to November 2020 when President Biden went into office. Oil was $38 and then it ran up towards 90 or close to 95 or 85 to 95, somewhere in that range. But oil has been on a run for a lot longer time than just the Ukrainian, war with Russia. But there's a lot of different things going on right now, John. And it is interesting to see the price actually dip underneath 100. Now, will that hold or not?
No.
Yeah, there you go. Tell me a little bit. What do you think about it right now, John?
I agree with you, Pete. It ran up because of some of the president's policies on energy. The last boost was indeed not even Putin, because Putin didn't cut off oil yet. He is cutting back on natural gas, but it's the sanctions that we put on Putin and that Europe put on Putin that are driving up prices. That doesn't mean he's not responsible, but it's us, you know, we collectively, the West, are doing this and doing it to ourselves to try to hurt him. And it hasn't hurt him. His currency is actually even higher than it was before the war. Lastly, Pete, it's the recession. We're down in crude oil because people are saying we're going into a recession. I'm hoping it's not a deep recession, but I think we're in it already, Pete. Next topic I wanted to hit was storage companies, because you've got the likes of a PSA or PLD, which is Prologis, or Cube, CUBE. These are companies that I think you want to watch. If indeed we're going into a recession, people aren't going to be moving as much, which means a lot of stuff they have in storage, unless they put it on eBay, Pete, they're going to keep it in storage. And that means these guys make big bucks. What do you think?
Well, I think you're right, John. And I think we've always been, Americans tend to be hoarders, right? I mean, there's how many people do you and I both know that they've got storage units. They got 5,000, 8,000, 10,000 square foot houses. They still got a storage unit somewhere. And it's just absolutely amazing. It makes me think of Storage Wars with Daryl Sheets and all those guys and the guy. They're all over this whole thing. And it's kind of, it's pretty comical, quite honestly. And some of the crazy things that we see that are put away in some of these storage units. But it makes sense, John, what you're saying. And I think that we're seeing a lot of that. People did kind of shift around. We all know that over the movement that's been going on in housing and everything else. And I think you're exactly right. I think that these are areas of the economy that don't get talked about very often, but I think they're pretty interesting. And you know what? I don't own any at this point in time, but I certainly have been looking for a while and trying to decide when might be an entry. And I'd like to see some unusual options actually kind of kick in and throw me in there, but I'm not really ready yet to jump in.
Yeah, and I haven't jumped into them hard yet, Pete. I've traded them, but I've not jumped in hard. So I do get exactly what you're saying.
And how about these airlines, John? I mean, there's a whole lot going on in the airline world. It's absolutely crazy. How many times did we hear this past weekend about all the cancellations and the late and all this other stuff? And it was amazing. I got to tell you personally, I actually had a great experience flying this past weekend. You were talking about Kenny Chesney. We went down to Kansas City. The plane was on time. The plane was full. Everybody was happy. Everybody was smiling. And it was exactly the same thing on the way back. It was phenomenal. So knock on wood, we had a great experience, but I know there's a lot going on out there. And I think you know something about a bankruptcy that's going on as well.
Oh yeah. SAS folks, which is the national airline over there for Sweden. This Scandinavian airline had to file for bankruptcy protection. I will say, Pete, as you know, I fly American a lot. I've only had one canceled flight. It happened last night. So that's why I'm not in Puerto Rico today. I had to shoot from Chicago today because at the last minute, they canceled the flight because they couldn't get pilots or crew. And the pilots thing, I do blame the president. Here's why. I'm not a hater of Joe Biden, but I do call out both sides, right and left. And when he said pilots had to be vaccinated, these are heavy-duty military people for the most part. Yep. They don't like being told what to do because they had to take that for 20 years or more, Pete, when they were in the military. Maybe it was only 6 years, depending how long they signed up. But you know what a lot of those pilots did? They didn't take the jab. They quit, and now they're flying private. So, thanks a lot. That's why we need so many more pilots right now that we just don't have.
Yeah.
As far as unusual activity, Pete, I'm going to hit Amazon. And Amazon, just like we said, top of the show about Google, has just gone through a huge stock split. I think it's a screaming buy. The closer you can get it to 100, I think you've got a great company here, bull by the tail, if you will, or whatever. And I think that even if we go into a recession, people will be even more dependent on what Amazon provides, not just goods and services, but the service side, the AWS, Pete, because more companies will be trying to communicate and work with their customer digitally rather than bricks and mortar. So Amazon is my pick there. They're buying short-term calls and longer-term calls. I think this one probably goes 10 to 12% higher in the next 30 days or so.
And I'm looking at the XRT, John, which is the retail ETF. Interesting one. It's a lot of diverse, different companies within that, of course, but it's sitting right at 52-week lows. So take a look at that chart, guys. I mean, it's pretty awful, but somebody out there seems to think that this thing's got some legs in front of them because They're buying 9,000 of the August 62 calls, John, for about $2. Then a couple of minutes later, they came right back in there and they bought another 12,000 of the August 63 calls. So we are seeing some huge buying in there. Maybe the bottom is in. We'll see. But certainly the options world seems to think that the XRT might have a little bit of life left and might have a little bit of life to the upside over the next. And it's not short term. They're going out to August. They're giving a little bit of time for this to happen. So we'll see. I mean, the retailers, we know it's been very difficult. We know everybody's struggling. We know all the different things about people spending and where they can spend and the price at the pump. Well, maybe with oil going down the way it has, and if it stays down here near 100 or less, maybe that gives a little bit of a reason to think that maybe there is something to this. Maybe the retailers will see a little bit more cash coming their way.
Yep. And whenever Pete and I talk about calls, folks, that's a bet on the upside of the market. If we're talking about puts, that's a downside bet. So Amazon, I'm already in the stock and I'm in calls, which again are upside bets. Pete was talking about the XRT, which is the retail ETF, and upside bets in that one.
Yeah.
Pete, what do you have for us in sports? I know that you have a sports talk radio show on Sundays, the Huddle, the Sports Huddle. What were you guys focused on this week?
God, we had so many things, John. We could barely fit it into the 2 hours that we had. We had Michelle Braun, who, by the way, is playing in the Women's Professional Football League, and they're going to go to the championship game this coming weekend. It's going to be on ESPN, which is cool. They're going to have that. We also had Rich Gannon on there, who was unbelievable, an MVP quarterback, that good friend of mine who called in to talk about Baker Mayfield and what's going on in Cleveland and all that kind of thing. So we had some really great guests. We also had a goalkeeper for the United States, a woman who's just absolutely phenomenal. Absolutely loved her. Everything about her is fantastic. She's got a special that's going to be getting released on streaming as well with Paramount. So it was filled. But the biggest trade I have maybe ever seen, John. So the Timberwolves right here in Minnesota, actually the ones who did it. So we've got a brand new general manager, and apparently he wanted to make a bit of a splash. We just paid the guy $40 million as a GM to come here for the Timberwolves. And he made a splash because in his very first trade, he decided to give 4 first-round draft picks, actually 5, because the guy that we drafted this year in the first round was part of the trade as well. So 5 first-round draft picks to get Rudy Gobert. Now, people who don't maybe know who he is, he's an absolute monster. He's played for Utah. He's originally from France. He played out on the East Coast for college at Marist. Great player, one of the best players in the game right now. He's probably the best defensive player in the game right now. The guy's absolutely incredible. And they gave him 2 or 3 starters as well on the basketball team. So this is a lot like the Herschel Walker trade of late as well, John. And it's pretty interesting to see what the Timberwolves were willing to do.
Yeah, and Pete, just to give the counterpoint, none of these really huge trades have ever really worked out because for whatever reason, that bright, shiny object out there, you know, for all our friends on Sports Illustrated and so forth with the Arena Group, that bright, shiny object sometimes gets people to do stupid things. And Ricky Williams, Ditka traded away the future for the New Orleans Saints when he was the head coach down in New Orleans to get Ricky Williams, who was probably in the league, Pete, 2 years.
Yeah.
He was a great college player and he was a great pro, but he had a little marijuana problem.
I was going to say he liked the ganja.
Back in those
he
days,
was rolling up
if
big
you had
fatties
that
on
in
the
your
sideline.
system, you were not going to be playing pro football very long. No. And hopefully that changes because some of these guys need some medication, and I don't really think it's a lot different, quite frankly, than alcohol.
Right.
But back then, Ricky couldn't play more than those 2 years because he couldn't stay off the ganja.
Yeah.
I think Herschel Walker, Ricky Williams, any of these kinds of trades are just too much, Pete. And I hope yours works out with the Timberwolves.
I do too. It's going to be a big one. The 18 men that were part of that Herschel Walker trade was unbelievable. Lastly, John, real quick, UCLA, USC. Now they're going to leave the Pac-12. They're coming to the Big Ten. We've already got 14 teams. It's not the Big Ten. It's the Big 14. But we've got 14 teams. Now it's going to be 16 teams. That's interesting. This is a lot like what's going on down with the SEC when they picked up Oklahoma and Texas. So everybody's going either to the SEC or the Big Ten, and there's a lot of fear out there right now. I got to tell you, I think this is going to be the end for some of the college football because People love rivalries. People love to see Minnesota play against Iowa or Wisconsin, and that's not going to happen at some point in time where these big rivalries are no longer going to be there because you got 20 teams in a conference. There's no way you can play everybody. And they're talking about maybe at some point it's just the SEC and the Big Ten. So if you got 50 teams here and 50 teams there, I don't know. It doesn't feel like college football to me. It feels like pro football, which by the way they are because they're all getting paid this NIL money.
Yep. That NIL money, name, image, and likeness, folks, is a huge part of sports these days.
Yep.
Granted, football players are getting the bulk of it, but it goes all the way down to volleyball, women's volleyball, Pete, hockey, everything.
Yep.
Folks, thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the Rebel's Edge. We gave you some topics that we're trading, some in particular, some unusual option activity that we both own, and a little bit of sports. Let us know what you think at JON Najarian, Najarian, or at Pete Najarian, Najarian. And we'll see you next week. Bang.
Bang.